Hi, and welcome to this short how-to session in Valispace. My name is Paul, and today I'm going to show you how to specify your product with our tool by using the requirements module. With this session, we are going to start right at the beginning of the engineering V cycle of system engineering, where we are defining our requirements and their architecture. Valispace helps you and your team in this process by defining requirements and their specifications to provide a foundation for your projects by outlining desired functionalities and constraints, aligning efforts, and ensuring the end product meets the desired objectives. Generating those requirements involves capturing stakeholders' needs comprehensively, reducing rework, and enhancing system quality. Breaking down requirements enables detailed analysis, identifying dependencies, and facilitating effective resource allocation. Updating, managing, and reviewing those requirements ensures their relevance and consistency, supporting decision-making and response to projects' dynamics. Final reporting of those requirements maintains transparency, informs stakeholders, tracks progress, and promotes collaboration and alignment for successful project outcomes. Valispace supports you and your team throughout this whole process chain, not only with our dedicated features, but also with our innovative AI-powered ValiAssistant, enhancing your requirements engineering to new heights. But first, let us take a look at what product we are exactly specifying. So we are going to use Valispace as our main requirements and system engineering tool for the development of an electrical vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, the Valicopter 5000. This whole session is centered around 4 main points. Firstly, we are going to start by importing pre-existing stakeholder requirements in the form of a business specification, and this is going to be followed by improving, breaking down, and detecting inconsistencies by means of the ValiAssistant. The second point can also be done manually, but with the help of the ValiAssistant, we simply get there between 10 and 100 times faster. In the third and fourth part, we are going to categorize and review our requirements, so a final report can be generated. That can be communicated either internally or back to the stakeholders. All right, now that we know what we're trying to develop, let's start out by doing 3 things in Valispace. First, we're going to import requirements from a pre-existing file. And then we're going to use the ValiAssistant to do 2 different things. We're first going to improve the requirements that we import based on certain industry standards. And then we're going to break down all of these requirements into sub-requirements and subsystems. For this, let's jump into the requirements module and start out by creating a specification. Let's call this business specification here, since it's going to contain all of our requirements from the business side. Once this is created, we can jump into this and we can create now requirements based on 3 different modes. We can either use the ValiAssistant to generate requirements based on a prompt that we input here, or we can manually create requirements, or we can use the import function to import requirements from pre-existing files. Let's go ahead and import requirements into this business specification. Let's hit continue. And here we're going to drag and drop our file into this little box, and Valispace is going to indicate us that the upload was successful. In the next window, we have to map out the fields of the file that we just uploaded to the fields that exist in Valispace. So here you can see that Valispace already, based on the header of the columns, identified that the identifier column is going to be mapped to the identifier field in Valispace. The text column is going to be mapped to text, and the rationale column is going to be mapped to the rationale. Let's go ahead and hit import. And once this is imported, we can see that all of these requirements have been imported here into this business specification. And we can see that the fields have been populated as we want them to. We can now easily come into here and select all of the columns that we want to see. So for instance, in this case, we want to see the text column, the rationale, and we're going to be working on the breakdown of these requirements. So the parents and children columns are also important. For now, the other columns are not very interesting, so we're just going to be leaving it like this. And now we can actually right click and select Save View here. What this does is it will save this view as our favorite view for, let's say, the draft view, since this is going to be our favorite view to work in when we draft out our requirements. Let's select Favorite, so it will appear in the drop-down menu. And now we have the option to simply jump between the draft view and the default view, so we can always work on our requirements. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the ValiAssistant to improve these requirements. So we can either do that by selecting all of the requirements and hitting the ValiAssistant here, and he will do the selected option based on the selection that we did. Or we can also simply use this button here, which will act upon all of the requirements in this view that we have right now, so in the business specification. Let's go ahead and select here Improve Requirements, since we want to improve the requirements based on a certain standard. And for this, we're going to select to customize the ValiAssistant output, since we're going to give it another prompt to take into consideration. In this case, you can add additional prompts here, as you can see, and we're going to take advantage of one that is already suggested here, where we're going to apply Inconsistencies standards to write the requirements. Once we hit continue, Valispace is going to improve these requirements based on the input that we gave it, and you can see that right now we have the requirements in a little bit better form, and we already have certain values and units indicated here. You can see that the word shall is used as the main word for requirements, and you can see that all of these have been added. Once we accept these improvements, Valispace will automatically improve the requirements, and now you can see that they all have been improved. So one thing that we can do right now is actually we can generate a report from this. So let's once again go into the ValiAssistant and select Create Summary. So he's going to take into consideration all of these requirements, and he's going to give us a little summary of the requirements, which he's going to create in the analysis module. After this has been done, let's go ahead and check out the requirements description in the analysis module by clicking on the link, and it will bring us right into the analysis module where we have a key description of our project. So as you can see here, the ValiAssistant helped us in summarizing the requirements into one paragraph and gives us key technical parameters, as you can see here. We're going to use actually these key technical parameters as an input for our breakdown. So let's go ahead and copy those, come over to the requirements, into our business specification, and let's concentrate on our last requirement down here, the one that is talking about the sensors. So let's go ahead and select the ValiAssistant here, select the breakdown, and now we're going to select yes, we want to customize the ValiAssistant output with the summary that we just created. So we're going to put this here, and now we're giving him key background information about how to break down these requirements. Let's select Breakdown Requirements. And you can see that based on the description of the requirement itself and based on the summary, Valispace gave us key technical parameters on how this requirement should be broken down into smaller requirements. If we hit continue, he will automatically add these requirements into our list. And you can see that he automatically populates the parent-child relationships between these requirements. You can see that now this is the main requirement, which has 5 different children requirements, which are these below it. And we can easily come into this requirement and take a look at the children, for instance, so you can work side by side with these requirements. Or you can even take a look at the connections graph where it will show you the breakdown of these requirements and how they are made up. Since these are now a breakdown of these requirements, let's create another specification called System Specification, for instance, where we're going to move our new requirements into. So for this, we can easily create a column here, which shows us the specification, for instance, and we can go ahead and select all of the broken down requirements and move them into the system specification, since they're already talking about the system specifications. Once this is done, you can see that they've been included in the system specification and been removed from the business specification. And if we look at all of the requirements now in the connection graph, you can see that we now have the breakdown structure between the two specifications, the business specification on top and the system specification on the bottom. So you can see we now have a simple breakdown structure in a few clicks from the main specification, from the business specification where we started out. The next thing that we're going to look at is how to parameterize these requirements. So how to transform these values and units into parameters that we can actually use for our verification and validation process. Let's take a look at this in the next step. All right, in this part, we're going to take a look at 4 different topics. First, we're going to try to understand how can we use these type and state columns to categorize our requirements. Then we're going to try to understand how we can transform these values and units into parameters that we can actually use for the verification and validation process. Then we're going to take a look at two collaborative features, mainly the discussion and the notification feature here. And in the end, we're going to understand how we can release these requirements into their final state so we can perform a formal review process on them. So if you look here on the left-hand side, you can see that I've now subdivided all of our requirements into different folders, specifications, and sections and subsections, where each one of the specification contains requirements, but each of the section can also contain requirements, as you can see here. If we come to all of the requirements and take a look at the connection graph, we can see that now we have a flow down of the requirements from high level to low level based on their specific breakdown. If we come back into all of the requirements into our list, we can now work on the categorization of these requirements. So for instance, we can highlight all of our requirements and we can set their state into a draft state, because in this session, we're going to keep working on these requirements and we want to keep them in a draft state for now. This helps us to easily filter out and save a view for this draft view, which I have created here, where we always be working on the draft state of these requirements. Something else that we can do to categorize requirements is we can work on the type. So for instance, if we look into the text column and we filter out for something with software, we will be presented with all of the requirements that contain software in them. For these, we can easily select all of them and assign a software type that has been created beforehand in the settings. Once this is applied, we can now see that the type has been applied to all three of these requirements, and we can go ahead and do the same maybe for all of our power requirements, which we can highlight as well and set a type to power here. This helps us to easily set up all of these filters and filter functions and views in the end that lets us easily select the requirements that we want to work on. The next thing that we're going to do now is we're going to look at if all of these requirements that we have created using the ValiAssistant actually make sense. So for this, we can come into the product specification here, for instance, and we have a bunch of requirements here, but we don't know if all of these make sense. What we can do here is actually use the Find Inconsistencies feature with the ValiAssistant. The Find Inconsistency feature basically takes a look at all of the requirements in the specification and tries to understand whether they make sense or not, if there are any contradictions or any information that is amiss. So for instance, in this case, we have incompatible values. So different passenger capacities are specified, and we can see that one requirement is talking about 5 passengers and another requirement is talking about 4 passengers. We can easily come in here and correct this mistake. And after we have corrected it and continue, Valispace will automatically accept this change. So this helps us to keep track of all the requirements that we create using the ValiAssistant and to see if there are any inconsistencies within these requirements. Another thing that we can do in the requirements is actually take a look at their traceability, which lets us identify what happened to this specific requirement over time. So if we come into this little history tab here, you can see what happened to this requirement over the last second, minutes, hours, days, and months. And you can also see what values have been created, what values have been updated, and who did what on this requirement. This lets you keep full traceability of the requirements over its life cycle, and you can even start discussions here on all of these changes that have happened. Regarding discussions and the collaborative features of these requirements, you can see that the discussion tab is also possible here directly on the requirement, where you can open a discussion with one of your colleagues by tagging them, for instance, like this. And once this discussion is posted, this colleague will get a notification here in this little discussion tab, and you can easily look up the discussions that have been created. A similar thing that you can do to keep on track with the requirements is actually hit the subscribe bell here. So whenever you enable the subscription, you will get always updated on whether something changes on this requirement and what has happened over its life cycle. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take all of these requirements and transform the values that we have created here, which are normal text values in this case, into parameters that we can actually use. So in this case, we're going to keep working in our product specification, and we're actually going to use the ValiAssistant again to, in this case, validate all of these requirements. What the validated feature does is it takes a look at the requirement text and tries to understand whether there are units and values that can be associated, and he's going to transform all of these into parameters that we can use. So in this case, we have identified 6 requirements, and there's one value in these 6 requirements that we can validate in this case and transform into a parameter. And in this case, we can see that it has been done for this 4,000 kilograms, which has been transformed into a parameter that we can actually use. So if we close this up, you can now see that these 4,000 kilograms are here highlighted as a parameter. And whenever you need to change these values, you can also come into here and edit these values fully manually on this little edit button. So after going through this process of validify, of the collaborative features where we discussed on these requirements, and of categorization of these requirements, we are finally in a position to move these requirements into their final state. So we can select all of these requirements and actually move them into a final state, which will help us also simultaneously to keep track of all of the requirements that are in the final state and the requirements that are in the draft state, once again by using the filter function here. So now that they're in the final state, we can actually move on to the review process. However, work can still be done on these requirements. But we have a setting enabled here, which is the transition state. So if we come into the states here, you can see that in the states we have the draft, the in review, and the final state. And the final state has a so-called transition state associated to it. So whenever you have a requirement in the final state and there's still work to be done on the text field, it will automatically revert back into draft. So this helps you also to keep track of any change that happened to any of your requirements. And let's see how this works exactly. So if we come in here and we go into our view, into our final view, you can see that whenever we change something in the fields, like in the text field, for instance, so let's say it's not just for the passengers, but also for the luggage. I can write for passengers and luggage in this case. So there was work done on the text field of this requirement, and you can see that the state reverted back to draft. So there needs to be another step now to once again transform this into the final state and to be able to release this into a final review process. So the next part is going to look at exactly that, on how are we going to use our review center more specifically to go through a formal review of these requirements and how we can release them for a final report. Let's take a look at that. So in this final part of our session, we're going to take a look at how you can move through a formal review process of these requirements, as well as prepare a final report so we can communicate our reviewed requirements to external stakeholders or internal team members. So as you can see, we are still in the product specification and we have moved all of our requirements into their final state. And I've created here a review view, which is actually public. So everybody else on the team can see this view and have access to this view. And in this view, you can see that I've created a column for the reviews my rating, where our review process will be displayed, as well as the text column, which we have over here, the state, and the type of our requirements. So to move through a review process of these requirements, what we're going to do is we're going to take use of the review center. So we're going to select all of these requirements, and we're going to come over here into more options. We're going to select Start Review, and now we have to create the review for these requirements. As you can see, they're already selected here. You can also add more if you like. So if you click in here, you're going to have access to all of the requirements inside of Valispace of this project. So you can add more if you like. We're going to move on to the description. We just give it a name. In this case, we're going to make a preliminary design review of our product specification. Instructions, we're going to put review ASAP. And then we have to assign it. So for the reviews, I've actually created a group called Product Specification Reviewers, which contain several collaborators from Valispace here. which all will have access to this review and will be able to review these requirements. And as the approver, I'm going to put myself so I can make the final approve of this review process. Let's move on to the due date. Let's say we want to review it until tomorrow, for instance. And then we can still add a final message here saying, please take a look, for instance. So once this goes out, you can see that now in our reviews, my rating column, we have created here the PDR product specification review. And you can see that I instantly got a message here in the review center. So we can open up the review center and we can see that we have one which is assigned to me as the approver, and we have the one that I just set up. So it's the same review. If I click on the PDR review, you can see that we go into the review mode, which is actually different from the normal view of the requirements. And you can see that here, each one of the team members in the group, so we have 6 different team members in the PS review group, all of them can give a rating. So they can either accept proposed changes or decline these requirements. And they can even leave comments and discussions regarding these requirements and any changes that should be done. Once this has been closed, so once everybody gave their inputs, their discussions, and all the discussions have been closed, you as the reviewer can then approve this final review. And if we approve it, this will close the review. And you can see that now it has been closed here by me on this date. And now we have moved through a formal review of these requirements. So the last thing that we have to do after this formal review process is take a look at how we report these requirements. So there are different ways of reporting requirements in Valispace. The first thing and the most agile way to report these requirements is actually through our analysis module. So let's take a look firstly at that. And for that, we're actually going to take advantage of the document that has already been created by the AI here. So as you remember, we created a technical description and key technical parameters from the AI. And we can actually just rename this one as PDR review product spec document, for instance. Everybody else in Valispace will have access to this document as well and will be able to make changes here. And what we're going to do here is actually we're going to start out with one interesting thing, which is using actually the mass of the final aircraft, which we have already defined in the requirements in the previous section of this video. And we, instead of having a text here, we're going actually to add the parameter to this. So if we hit the dollar symbol here, you can see that we are presented with a list of values, so a list of parameters that we can add here. But we're going to select specifically the one that we have created under the product specification. And as you remember correctly, this one was the 4,000 kilograms that have been validated from before. And you can see that now we have actually access to this parameter once again here, and we can hover over this. So this is going to show you exactly where it lies and the value it contains. We can also, for instance, define the decimal places that we want to display. But the important thing here is that now this is actually a parameter instead of a normal text. So any changes on this parameter, be it in here or in the requirements, will automatically update each one of the parameters wherever they lie. So the next part is actually adding here a new block. And we're going to add a block firstly as, let's say, a heading. And here we're going to have the requirements from the product specification, which have been reviewed. And then we're going to add another block here with a table in this case, and you have different options. You can add images and videos, you can add different charts to this, and you can add tables. And specifically, we are interested right now in this requirements table. So let's select the requirements table. And what this does is it will present us with all of the requirements that we have in our requirements module. But we are only interested in the ones that have been actually reviewed. So we're going to open this up and we're going to select the review my rating column. And then what we're going to do is in here in this review my rating column, we're going to select our filter that we want to filter out. So we don't want to see any blanks in this. We only want to see the ones that we have selected specifically for the review. And like this, you can see that now we have all the information of the requirements that have been formally reviewed from before. So once this is ready, we can actually share this report externally coming into the options here and selecting share. And what this does is actually it's going to create a shareable link, and we can select how this link is going to be viewed. In this case, I'm going to select myself. Once we create this link, we have a link here which we can copy and then send around to external stakeholders that don't have access directly to Valispace. But if they open up this link, this will show them exactly what we see here with all the filters applied and all the information that is necessary for this PDR review. Another way of sharing information, and specifically the requirements, is actually exporting them from Valispace. So whenever we come into the requirements and once again into the product specification, we can actually right-click on the requirements and we can select our exporter here. So we have the option to export them as a CSV file or as Excel files, which then can be shared. And whenever you export this will always export any columns that you see. So whatever columns you add here through this option and then hit export, you will actually export each one of these columns that you see here, and they will all be displayed in the same file. A third way of creating a report is actually using a script. So we have the scripting module here where I prepared a specific script for the export. So here we have a report script, and I have created a Python script here that will take all of our requirements that are right now in our product specification. And once we run this script, this will actually create a new file here in our file management system. And once we come over and this file has been created right now, as you can see, we have a timestamp on this file that tells us exactly when this was created. And this is actually a Word file that you can easily download, and you can prepare a template, which is also stored here in the file management system. And the final report will be based on the template that you have created. So let's just take a look at how this looks in the end. So you can see that I've created here a little Valispace symbol as the header, and I have created a template which basically only takes the identifier of the requirement and the text and outputs them as a Word file using the script that I have just shown you. You can add more fields here, so whatever field you add will also be taken into consideration. If you want to add, for instance, the type or the final state or any verification methods, you can also add these fields in this template and it will be taken into consideration. With this, we are at the end of our little session, and I hope this helped you to get a better idea of how to move through specify a product with Valispace. So let's take a look at what we just explored. In conclusion, the successful development of any product and its systems relies heavily on effective requirements and system engineering practices. Throughout this session, we explored how Valispace helps you during the process of product specification. We explored how to build your requirements and specifications, concentrating on how to import, generate, improve, and break them down to ensure clarity and alignment with the stakeholder needs. Further, we looked at Valispace helping you during updating, managing, and reviewing requirements to adapt to evolving project dynamics. Don't forget our transition state, history, and traceability feature, which helps you keep track of any changes that happens to a requirement during its lifecycle. Lastly, we highlighted the value of reporting requirements accurately and comprehensively to facilitate effective communication and decision making. By implementing these best practices, you can enhance your system development processes, leading to improved quality, reduced risk, and increased stakeholder satisfaction in this iterative phase of product specification. Thank you for your attention during this little session on how to specify a product in Valispace. I hope the information gathered here helps you and your team to build your products faster and more efficiently. If you have any questions or input, please do not hesitate in reaching out either directly to me or to Valispace. Feel free to check out our other features on our website. See you next time.